My name is Benny Slade, and you're listening to the MO Sessions. Some people don't just add to a craft, they shift the way we think about it. He's a magician, storyteller, sartorialist, and the mind behind magical thinking. A podcast that didn't just talk about magic, but expanded into the philosophy and the artistry behind them. For a lot of us, myself included, magical thinking was more than just another magic podcast. It was a space where magicians could slow down, talk deeply about their process, and really reflect on why they do what they do. And it shifted how many of us approach, and still approach, magic and the art. I know for certain I wouldn't have this podcast if it wasn't for such a heavy influence from the Magical Thinking Podcast. Every day, listening to a new episode, or whenever they came out, and being inspired by the conversation that exists from people who are such deep thinkers and creators and conjurers, absolutely inspired me. But his curiosity has always stretched beyond just magic. He co-founded Art of Magic, a platform that treated magic like a serious art form, and later launched Rakant, his menswear brand focused on helping people express their most authentic selves, whether he's working with a deck of cards or a custom suit. At the core of it all is storytelling, how we present ourselves and connect with others. Today we talk about the spaces he's created, the gaps still left in the magic world, and why crafting an experience, whether it's an effect or a tailored jacket, always comes down to intention. This is the MO Sessions, and this is Elliott Terrell.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad that we finally were able to do it and schedule time, and I'm excited to sit down with you and have a conversation about magic that we love so much. And I hope that I can provide some kind of insight for anyone who may be listening.
Absolutely. So before we started recording, you said something that really stuck out to me. You said a quote by Pete Holmes, and it's something that you're a different magician, conjurer in front of me today, and much different than the last time we spoke. So it's really important for me to tap on that. And your quote was, "Live a life worth commenting on."
Yeah, that was something that I used to throw around because I was, just doing my best to imitate who I was impressed by, which was Pete Holmes. And when I started the podcast, it was heavily influenced by his. And something that he said that really resonated with me was live a life worth commenting on. And in my 20s, I was using that phrase as a way of getting people to try and have experiences greater than just studying magic tricks. And, I have come in a little bit more of my maturity to understand live a life worth commenting on isn't just be an interesting person so people are interested, is what it is acknowledging in yourself what is worth commenting on. Where is it that you're coming from, and where is it that you want to go? And then how you show up in the world in alignment with those two things. So live a life worth commenting on to me now is a lot more about being someone as an example and commenting upon the results that way of being manifests or, shows up. The results that you get from doing this way, and then reporting back on how it was different, almost as an experiment on how the experience was different. So live a life worth commenting on, which I just stole from Pete Holmes, and you made it weird, has become something that I don't think about much anymore because it just is something that I think it's just part of who I've become. I've always wanted to comment on life, even since I was a little kid. And I think now, be someone or live a life worth commenting on is I'm old enough that I've lived a life.
Yeah.
And now have something upon which I may comment.
A lot of life has happened since you've hit the airwaves, and I am curious to know, and we'll dive into all of it all. You've kind of had an interesting path going from art of magic to magical thinking, to what you're doing now with your brand of menswear, Raconte Boutique. Incredible. But before we dive into all of that, I want to start at the beginning so we understand where your conjuring started. You were born in Monroe, Louisiana. That must be why you like Waffle House so much.
Waffle House is the greatest place in the whole universe.
I went this morning to get in the Elliott mindset for today's episode.
I'm honored and thrilled, and that's deeply touching to me. You did a powerful spell this morning. Yeah, Waffle House is the best. My phone background is from inside a Waffle House.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You need to come to Atlanta and experience
actually,
the Waffle Houses.
This is the Waffle House in my hometown of West Monroe.
Amazing.
So that is a picture from inside the Waffle House on the north side of Thomas Road.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So from a young age, you're in Monroe. You, assuming our generation had the late night shows, you were influenced a lot by David Letterman and Bob Barker and all people who, for different reasons maybe, were very influential for me, but they had undeniable charisma. What was it about them that stood out to you at a young age?
Well, as a kid, I was really attention seeking from a performative aspect. So when I was 4 years old, this is one of, if not my earliest memories, my 4th birthday party, my dad built me a stage that I could come out of and do my little monologue on. And so, yeah, I was watching daytime soap operas and game shows with my caretaker. And that was, the big ones were Wheel of Fortune and The Price is Right. And then at nighttime, I was watching The Late Show with David Letterman. I didn't really have bedtime that I remember, and it was on. And but the things that drew me to those people, Bob Barker, David Letterman, these icons of television, were similar and different, but they involved being on a stage and holding an audience in their hands, and then creating an atmosphere through that was conducive to whoever that person was and what they were doing. And obviously I didn't know that at the time. I couldn't communicate that as a child, but I was really drawn to wear a suit, stand in front of people, everyone has a good time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been doing recently, like in the last year, is really trying to get back in touch with those early childhood influences and adopt some of the pieces of them more intentionally than I had the rest of my life. You know, these guys, even though they weren't performing conjuring, they were magicians. They were standing up in front of a group of people, casting spells, and changing people's experience. And so I was really interested in that and was drawn to it. I think, again, it's not a logical thing. It's just that I could sense some kind of inbredness, there was something there that was really attractive to me. And so in the recent years of my adulthood, reincorporating those things, obviously they wore suits. So I became a suit maker and started crafting that whole thing. And one of the things that I've started doing in the last year is wearing cowboy boots, specifically roper boots, as a nod to where I came from, as a nod to the South, as a nod to, the archetypical significance of what cowboy boots represent.
Right.
Right. So I think that it's important to go back to youth and to childhood and those early influences and re-examine them from the place you are now, because it's not that you necessarily won't feel the same. It's that you now have such a broader context of your life to put those influences in. And whatever was exciting to you as a child will still be exciting to you today. Absolutely. And here's an example of that. One of the biggest influences that I had as a kid, outside of like the icons of stage, David Letterman, Bob Barker, etc., was Steve Irwin.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten that. But when he died, he's the only celebrity that I have like wept for an hour at the passing out. He was deeply, deeply personally impactful to me. But as a kid, I didn't understand why. Well, yesterday, my partner and I stumble upon Crikey, It's the Irwins, which is an HBO show about Terry and their children, Steve and Terry's children, Bindi, and what's his name? I can't remember this. I think it's Robert.
Yeah,
And
it's
how
Robert.
they're continuing the legacy. God, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but like recognizing just recently, yesterday, that was a huge part of my life has given me, now with the context that I'm carrying around, this recognition, like the reason that I was so moved by Steve and what he was doing is that he was utterly and totally committed.
Yes.
And in that first part, in the first episode of, and it's like, I don't know, it's an old show. I don't even think they're making it anymore. It's from 2018 to 2022. But in the first episode, Harry talks about, carrying on the legacy and watching his children carry on the legacy. But she says something like, Steve understood that you don't have to want to hold every animal or cuddle every animal,
Yeah.
but that you should protect it.
Yeah.
And he was just someone that shone with such a pure light for a cause that matters and was doing it with joy
Yeah.
and excitement. Steve was a father figure in many ways, teaching the public about how to be present with nature, how to respect the things outside your body. He was about harmony and balance and, joy.
Yeah.
Fuck, man, if that's not what you're doing, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And
I
that
feel that
reminded
way.
me of that.
I don't want to show my age, but I feel that way with Mr. Rogers. I mean, Mr. Were you just going to cry on the podcast? I don't know.
I teared up already. I get pretty wet.
Mr. Rogers was, I think one of the most incredible people to have been here, but more so the influence he had on my upbringing, because my parents were a little bit older when they adopted me. My sister had been watching, she's 7 years older than me. So my sister had been watching, I mean, that was like her, I don't know what's on TV right now for kids, but the mother,
I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. I have kids, but they're out of that phase. I don't know, whatever the kids programming is. Man, I sound so old. That sounds crazy. Anyways, but Mr. Rogers definitely had that. And I watched his documentary recently, which I don't know why I didn't watch it earlier. And I cried through the entire thing because everything they talked about, not just because he was Mr. Rogers and he had a show, but who he was and who he influenced and the people who wrote letters to him and, the impact he had on these people is just, it was everybody from people who were sad, depressed, race issues, disabilities, like it's just incredible. And here's just this man with a platform like you and I have had talking about everything under the sun. I mean, he had the Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz on there putting on the costume to tell kids it's okay not to be scared of costumes and witches and
Fred was doing what Steve was doing.
Yeah.
But Fred was doing it people to people and Steve was doing it people to animals.
I remember when Steve Irwin died, I was living in New Jersey and we had just gotten a TV in my room, the big back TVs. And I remember, I don't know what I was watching, but I had fallen asleep and woke up and CNN had breaking news of he got
Stung by a stingray.
Yeah. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, he was over here talking about he has a new, season of his show coming out and he's, I couldn't believe it. So it did have an impact. I cried. I really did. I really did cry because he was on everywhere at that time. So I understand.
Yeah, he was hugely influential to me. That I spent so much time watching his show. And when I was in fourth grade, my girlfriend at the time in fourth grade. Okay. I'm just going to, whatever. I thought that's what it was. Anyway, we did a talent show competition and I was Steve and she was Terry. At Christmas one year, my grandparents got me, I think it was my grandparents got me this like animatronic, a little alligator that would like,
Yeah.
I've always been a mimic. I've always done voices and goofy faces, and Jim Carrey was another big influence. And so for the 4-H competition, wrote and choreographed this whole thing where, this alligator would walk out and I'll go, Rocky, yeah, the guy with this, it's the, whatever, and jump out on the stage and wrestle the alligator. And she just kind of stood there in the side and would point and talk and help and whatever. It was just, absurd. Oh, Rocky, it's this, like, it's the most venomous snake in the world. And she'd drag me off the stage. It was just this, like, goofy, fun thing, but Steve was somebody, and the people that I was drawn to were, what I can recognize now is that the people that I was drawn to were present and they were emotionally available. Maybe the only case that wasn't was Letterman, but that was by design, and it was part of the alchemy that he was doing in that space. And so whether or not I understood that, I could sense it.
Yeah.
Which I think everyone has the ability to do. I think we just learn not to listen to it because of the system that we live in. As a kid, you haven't learned not to understand that yet. And so I think that that's one of the ways that we learn quickly as children, is that we're processing with all three of our brains, not just the top one. And what I mean by that is our gut, our heart, and our brain.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I was really fortunate to have all these different non-local influences. I didn't have any. I grew up in Monroe. There weren't really magicians around. The one guy that did birthday parties was doing, like the classic hack birthday party magician. And it wasn't hack because he was the only guy in town doing it, so
yeah.
Like I just didn't, that wasn't what interested me. I didn't want to do that. And so I didn't have local influences in my magic. And a lot of the influences that I got were from film and television and things of that nature. And so I just didn't know not to trust the things that I felt were good.
Right.
From an early age. And again, I think that's an innate thing, and I think it can be developed. I just never undeveloped it. I just kept developing it, which is privilege, absolute privilege, that I was able to keep doing that. Anyway.
You've talked about a family friend of yours when you were a kid challenging you to learn a trick, pull it off, and do it for him. Can you talk about that? What was that moment like for you?
Well, I had learned a few pieces of magic and went to meet this person who was my aunt's parents' friend, who was a lawyer and an amateur magician. And I went to meet this guy at the St. Louis Bread Company, which is the Panera Bread Company, by the way, for people that didn't know that. It started in St. Louis, and it's still called the St. Louis Bread Company in St. Louis. As far as I know, God, it's been however long since I have been there. So who knows? I showed him, I don't know if it was a color change or the, crazy man's handcuffs or something, but I read it out of this book and learned it and showed it to him. And I thought I was like super cool. And, because as a kid, you don't know that people know things you don't know.
Right.
As a kid, you're like, this is new to me and therefore it's new. And so I showed the tricks to him and they were good enough that he was impressed, but he wasn't fooled. And he was like, that's pretty good. Next time I see you, fool me with something.
Mm.
And that absolutely crushed my pride. And so I ran on that spike for a decade, I think. Just like, really, okay, well, sure. And so the next time I went back, to St. Louis, I got to meet up with some other people in St. Louis and have some other experiences in the magic community there, which is very robust. IBM number 1, ring number 1, SAM assembly 8, or maybe those might be reversed. But anyway, it's like good magic scene. And I was really fortunate to meet and befriend a guy named Randy Kalin, who is a fantastic magician in St. Louis. He's got a show there now with some other buddies of mine that I've come to know since then. But he was always a super encouraging and helpful mentor and remains one. We don't talk often. We see each other at conventions, but I consider him to be family, and he's really great in so many ways. But anyway, so yeah, I got into magic seriously as like, I'm dedicating my intellect to
Yeah.
this pursuit because out of spite, basically.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're self-taught? Because you said in Monroe there weren't a lot of magicians around, did you have to go on the deep dive yourself and start your pathway?
I have never considered myself someone who is self-taught because I've always considered myself someone who just found and consumed the information. And so the teaching is whoever wrote the book. So I have never considered myself self-taught, but people, like, when they describe what I do or how I became, they go, he taught himself how to do
Right.
this, which on one hand is true, but on the other, I'm like, but none of it's mine. I didn't create these principles or
Right.
you know, I didn't invent triumph.
Right.
That was somebody else. I just learned how to do it. So I'm a self-encouraged learner, but the teaching has to come from somewhere else. One of the benefits of not having those local examples or influences is that I didn't have bad examples.
Mm.
You know, so if I read a book, I assumed that the thing worked, and I assumed it worked as well as it said it worked.
Right.
And I assumed that the method could be done either invisibly or imperceptibly. And I think we both know that most of those things aren't true in a lot of magic literature.
100%.
But I didn't know that.
Mm.
And then I would learn videos from Theory 11 or Dan and Dave or whatever, and I would see these performance clips
Right.
of butter soft sleight of hand, and I thought that's just what that looks like. So again, to say that I'm self-taught, I'm like, well, Dan and Dave, Ricky Smith, Tony Chang, Alex Pandrea, Dan White, you know, there's so
Yeah.
many, Chris Kenner, Homer Lewag, you know, like there's so many examples of we shot it 100 times, so this is the perfect one. And I only ever saw the perfect one from the guy who did the perfect one, and then they taught it. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I just assumed it wasn't good until it was that good. And then I went to my first magic convention when I was 18 and, you know, was doing that, you know, Leonard Green was at MagicCon 2 and MagicCon 2 was my first convention. And so I spent 6 months learning the Top Shot, and I got there and I was like doing the Top Shot blindfolded, you know, from 30 inches apart. And people were like, who the fuck is this kid? And I was like, what do you mean you can't do this? And I was really fortunate to meet like Michael Feldman I met at that first convention, and he's still one of my closest friends. And I think maybe my longest running personal relationship in my life, aside from my parents. Like,
wow.
He's somebody that has been in my life since I was 18 now. And, as we've maintained a really lovely friendship throughout that time.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Do you feel like along your path there was a shift once you discovered, was Dan and Dave your first experience that was like, wait, what is this? And then it kind of shifted and it started to grow? Or where were you? Like for me, like my first book was Expert Card Technique. My grandparents got it for Hanukkah and they gave it to me. And I was like, what is this? I remember my grandfather saying, this isn't a kid's book. Like, this is a book that you need to study and you need to learn from.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, reading Birds of a Feather at 10 years old that whole section was like, yeah, I visualized it in my head and I was able to do it for a good amount of time. And then obviously I have so many other versions on it. Yeah. Reading that at 10 was like, and then once I actually saw it on video, it was different for me.
Yeah, man, it
actually killed it for me, if I'm being really honest.
It's funny. Thank goodness for Dover that they put out such great material and such cheap books. My first copy of Expert Card Technique got like totally waterlogged on a Boy Scout camp out where our tent was leaking and it was in my bag. And so it was like all warped and gross. And it's still my favorite copy of it, even though I have other copies of it now. It's like, that was the one that was mine. Great stuff. But what was your question? Sorry.
No, you're fine. What was your shift like, going from your self-influence and your reading books and and then video hits for you, or where along on your timeline did you start?
Well, I think one of the other early influences that I had as a kid was I was super into Batman, and I was super into King Arthur and Merlin by extension.
Nice.
So like all of the person that I am today is a culmination of the things I was interested in as a child.
100%.
Fully.
Yeah.
And that has become a lot more intentional in the last year or so. But I think these people that I was interested in were doing a service to a community larger than themselves. Bob Barker was making a whole crowd of people feel good and like sending people home with new appliances and new cars. And, you know, he was like the wizard. He's Santa Claus, you know,
We need
every
Bob
day at
Barker
3
back.
p.m. You know, David Letterman was dry and witty and sarcastic and could hold tension, you know, without needing to release it with a joke and some kind of ridiculous improvisation like Conan, who I didn't appreciate until much later.
Mm-hmm.
But those early influences, I recognized that like these people were doing something bigger than themselves. And so Batman and King Arthur and Merlin was like, this is about the well-being of Gotham or the well-being of the kingdom of Camelot, you know?
Yeah.
So I was shaped by this influence of thinking larger than myself.
Mm.
And I wanted to be a wizard. I would put on a cape and I would stand outside when the hurricanes would come through, you know, the Gulf of Mexico, and I would put on a cape and stand outside and interact with the wind. So I was just interested in this kind of wizard approach to guiding reality. And, you know, you can't learn how to do that really. And when you try to learn how to do that, you fall into conjuring.
Yeah. 100%.
And so for me, the books was like, I'm looking for real magic. And then the videos were, gosh, this is amazing. What's that? How does that work? There must be real magic in there. And then you'd get to it, and you know. And so I got into conjuring because I wanted to be a wizard. I didn't get into conjuring because I wanted to be a conjurer and then evolved into it. I was always a wizard. I was just building my tools and my toolkit to think about and understand things. That's what conjuring does, is it gives you an ability to zoom out and look at the reality that's occurring and how you can impact how it occurs for other people. That's where the real magic is in conjuring. It's one of the ways real magic is in conjuring. And so, you know, no one said that to me.
Right.
And so I just continued along with, I basically got distracted by the books and the videos from my wizard approach to, you know, all the magicians that I admired at the time were atheists, devout atheists, and thought that, and I grew up culturally Christian. I went to, you know, a Southern Baptist church growing up. And so part of my becoming was burning down the religion that I had had and exploring the materialistic aspects, you know, and those being method and performance and craft and art, and understanding that, you know, art is inherently spiritual. And so when we talk about conjuring, you know, is conjuring a craft or is it an art? My response is conjuring is a craft, and sometimes there are artists. And the key secret that no one told me is that magic is real and conjuring falls under the umbrella of magic as visual metaphor. No one had ever communicated that to me. And so it took me getting out of magic in 2018 and going on this new journey in my clothing and fashion expedition that gave me the life of live a life you're worth commenting on, that taught me the tools and necessary life skills to be functional and reasonably successful adult human in the system that we live in.
Yeah.
And that's where I was able to, I had gotten far enough away from conjuring while still thinking like a conjurer, while still engaging in sales and clothing as a magical aspect of an interplay, as a performance. So I just learned a lot about being with people and getting them what they wanted, such that when they got it, they were excited about handing you money.
Yeah.
Because you were making a difference for them.
Yeah.
And I was successful as a salesperson because I could rack up a really big sale with someone and they thanked me at the end of it because I wasn't selling them the expensive stuff because that's what they needed or wanted. I was selling them what they wanted, and I just could understand what they wanted even if they couldn't walk in and pick it up. And I think that's a tool that you can develop as a conjurer if you're paying attention to it. And that has to do with subtlety and being present with people. And so for me, it was like the magic exists outside of conjuring. Conjuring exists as a craft that is meant to be a metaphor for this larger thing. And so once I kind of had that realization, I went, well, I'm going to explore what this other thing is. And that led me back to a more spiritual approach to conjuring, not from a point of view of, I think that when I talk about spiritualism, I'm talking about incorporating a harmonious experience of being.
Right.
That provides a safe and secure space for people to open up maybe those subtle senses themselves in order to experience something transcendent, as opposed to take a card.
Right.
You know, and my opinion on that has changed drastically since then too, because once I realized that magic was real and conjuring happened inside of that, then there's room all over the place for hack magicians and bad magicians and bad magic. That's okay. It's all part of it. Yeah. It'll never not be that way, but it's my job in my mind to provide light to shine on a path out of that thing. Yeah. Not to denigrate that thing.
Yeah. I think for me, touching on what you were saying about being in menswear and being present with people, I find the same when I was going through menswear, which is not as extensive as your career in it. I did it for a short amount of time and then left, but through that, it led me to barbering. It just made sense with the same influence of men's grooming, just all together. And now I'm doing it as a consultation sort of thing, barbering, menswear, jewelry, just all of it now. But for me, it was having somebody in my chair, which I have a very old chair that I bought. And wherever I go, if I'm in a shop or if I have a setup, that's my chair. I don't want to use the shop's chair. There's something spiritually when they're in my chair that I sage from time to time and do all the other stuff and clear out the energy. They sit there and they know that when they're present with me, we're not going to sit here and talk about what haircut you want. It's about what haircut suits your lifestyle and what works best for your head shape and all this other stuff, and developing a taste to understand that this isn't Great Clips. This isn't Fantastic Sam's. I've been trained to formally cut hair and teach you why that works best for you and will look best on you, and you know, why it fits your lifestyle. And that's through consultation, talking with them, being in my chair for years and being present with them, knowing them. And that's why it's the same thing with like a pick a card. Instead of saying pick a haircut on the wall, that may not suit you. Yeah. This is what I advise is best for you. And yeah, that approach to barbering and being present with all different types of people, homeless people, people who literally are going to a funeral, you know, just a whole bunch of stuff. Like,
yeah, you know, every person has their own experience for reality. And because that's true, every person is the center of their own universe. And so it's my job when I'm with a person to integrate into their universe in such a way that it is helpful and beneficial to them and what they want. If we zoom out a little bit, we live in a society and a culture as sort of a global civilization, but I want to talk really specifically about the circumstances we find ourselves in. We live in a society fueled by lack. And we are encouraged to look externally for achievement and fulfillment and for the thing that's going to make you feel safe and secure and happy. Well, because we live in a society of lack, if you can provide something for someone that they aren't getting, or that they are intentionally being manipulated away from through identity politics and the like,
Mm-hmm.
then you can be bigger than the trick. So what do people want? They want safety and they want love. The difficulty now is that you cannot inauthentically create a space of safety and love. You must be safe to create safety. You must be healthy to heal, essentially.
100%.
And so it's our job. It's our whatever. You do what you want. It's my job to maintain, again, live a life worth commenting on. I'm
Right.
trying to be someone who is stable and present and not in a hurry and listening, not just hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I try to speak instead of talk.
Right.
It's developing these subtle, energetic investments,
Mm-hmm.
to show someone I'm invested in our experience together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to go how I want it to go.
Yeah.
And how I want it to go is great.
Mm-hmm.
If you come from a place of this is going to be great, not from a place of I'm going to be great, then you start building out a space in which people can come in and go, okay, I'm not in charge, somebody else is, and I trust that they're going to do a good job. Right? Building safety and security and love is about building trust. And lots of people don't have a lot of trust. And you can't, and one of the hard lessons that I learned is that you can't jump to trust. You can in a theatrical performance because they paid for the tickets, so they're kind of already there, in the same way that I never meet the pilot on the airplane, but I got on the airplane, so I just give him the trust.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not in a theatrical setting, you have to take a different approach. I think if you're trying to do anything that is like magic. If you're trying to do magic, you have to take a different approach. Theatrical performance and being a wizard are very, very different, and they can overlap, but they exist as separate enterprises.
Do you feel like, well, I guess a better way to phrase it is a lot of what you're speaking on has to do with TM, transcendental meditation, mindfulness, a lot of what Ram Dass speaks of, things that I'm heavily invested in and think about and partake in. Have you dove into that world? Which for me, I think along my path is part of my conjuring journey because it's allowing me to think drastically differently in general, but drastically differently about how my approach to magic and how I want people to feel when they sit around the table with me or whatever it is. It's drastically different, but it's rooted from that stuff.
Yeah. I have lots of friends that are into TM, and David Lynch just passed away, and he was a huge exponent of transcendental meditation. I am someone who is unlikely to take the path that is well trodden. Okay. And what I mean by that is I have enough people in my life doing TM that I don't need to do it. I'm interested in another path because I believe they're all different paths up the same mountain.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I got other people doing that research, I don't need to do it. I got to go do research on what I'm interested in.
Interesting.
So do I believe transcendental meditation does what it purports to? Absolutely, 100%. Do I believe that experiences like Ram Dass talks about are possible with and without psychedelic drugs? Absolutely, 100%. I just am not interested in those things specifically because it's just not what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And
that's okay.
I say that, right. I say that, but somebody listening goes, well, how do you know what you're supposed to do? And that goes back to what I was talking about earlier about being a child and having this developed subtle sense thing and never turning that off. And the trust that it's leading me in a good direction. And it always has. And so I hear those, and earlier in my kind of, burn all the spirituality down so the plot is clear and you can build your house back on top of it with the furniture and the decoration that you want. I'm a syncretist. That's part of my, I guess, self-taught nature, is that I'm looking everywhere for the truth underneath and trying to pull all the truth from all the different parts.
Mm.
So I like to think about truth the way that I think about God or magic, capital M magic, or the mystery or whatever, consciousness, which is that indefinable, ineffable thing is at the center of everything swirling around it that tries to get at what it is.
I understand.
Well, so, like, for me, the universal truths are the little black holes where the event horizon that we can see are, like the hero's journey, that something spiraling around the center of something.
Right.
And everything that you can toss on there that is similar to, synonymous with, symbolically corresponding to, etc. Those are all circumnavigating the truth. When they talk about reading between the lines, it's like you're trying to get into the voice or the message, not just the words on the page.
Right.
And the words on the page are like the pictures on the menu. That's not the meal.
Yeah.
It's the term, you're missing the forest for the trees, right?
Never heard it worded so well.
So coming at things with that understanding, really, which is kind of in its essence a magician's mindset,
Right.
gives you an opportunity to look at the whole world that way, and so like developing these fine-tuned extra senses, interoception and proprioception being the two big ones. Developing those senses gives you a full body experience, or an intuitive knowing, if you want to get wooey about it, of where the truth lies.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a system that encourages us not to think about or find the truth, but to believe what we're given.
Mm-hmm.
And so that the people who are giving us things have total power over our experience of reality. Interoception and proprioception have to do with harmony and balance. Proprioception is your brain's ability to receive signals from your tendons and ligaments and muscles and things. Interoception is your brain's ability to send and receive signals between your organs and your circulatory and nervous system, things of that nature. So those lead to specifically harmony and balance. And so, most people alive in America today grew up learning about 5 senses, not 7, or any of the other ones that we have now scientifically come to understand. But growing up in a system where we're encouraged not to explore and master harmony and balance leads to disharmony and imbalance.
100%.
Disharmony and imbalance are a predictable future that can be easily maintained through chaos.
100%.
So slowing down and getting present and building harmony and balance within your experience of your mind and your body opens up the channel between the three such that they can start working together to point you toward what is capital T truth.
Absolutely.
The thing that is more than literally or factually true, but is the thing that hasn't changed over thousands of years of history.
I think what's interesting from my perspective is seeing where you are now compared to the glimpses that we've had the opportunity to see and that you've shared with. From an outside perspective, you were trying to do that then, and now you're doing it.
Yeah. So I was trying to do it because I was looking for the answer in the tools.
Yeah, not in the sense that like you were intentionally trying. It's as if your ethos, yourself, your being was trying to do those things because knowing now this is where you were supposed to be. And along your journey, that's where you were trying to get. And now you've arrived at that point.
Yeah. At that point on the path, I was aware that having a full toolbox was going to be necessary for whatever I was going to build, which is why I'm a big proponent of learning and studying the fundamentals and the foundation really, really severely and specifically, because then that gives you the ability to play, right? When you start out on a new path of learning, you start with nothing and you don't know what you don't know. You don't know. Okay.
Yep.
Your first step is to figure out what you don't know. You don't know. And you do that by studying masters. You watch masters work and you get a sense of the masters that you enjoy and the masters you don't enjoy.
Right.
And that gives you your ability to understand what direction you need to go in. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you've started from nothing and you've gone all the way to mastery. Now you come back to nothing and you apply the vibe from what you got to the very beginning. And you go, the master plucks the strings like this. And so now you learn the foundational technique, but you apply it through the lens of what mastery looks like. And so I'm learning guitar right now. So I watch exceptional guitar players, and then I pull up a YouTube video on chords, right? And then I watch exceptional guitar players. And then I come back to a video on, the circle of fifths. And that, and so I'm like developing these techniques while honing my sense of taste. Because that develops an internal knowing. So you've started from nothing and you're going to mastery and you keep bouncing back and forth and you end up in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
And the middle is where you want to be because then you can go in any direction.
Yep.
Right. So for me, that's constantly the journey. And at that part of the path that I was on where I was looking for meaning, again, I got into doing magic because I wanted to be a wizard. And so it took me getting to the middle by developing all the foundation, the fundamentals, the understanding, and it took developing the taste and being able to sit down and talk to all of these amazing performers. To have any kind of semblance of autonomy in magic, where I wasn't just being influenced by other people, I was plotting my own course. You got to work your way to the middle, strike out in different directions.
Right.
And then, in the same way, just zoomed out, I had to get out of magic and do that in another way. And then I did. And in the same way in magic, I got to the top of the industry. In fashion, I got to the top of the part of the industry that I was in. And it was more valuable to me to recognize how I did those things than it is that I had done them.
Correct.
And so that's what I'm interested and engaged in for the future of my participation in magic, is as a person recognizing that there is a specific way to learn and approach anything that will get you results quickly. And by quickly, I mean more quickly than the last time.
Yeah.
So it took me being a magician from being a little kid until, let's say, call it the span of 10 years that I was at the top of that industry.
Yeah.
And then I left. And in 2018, I started in retail. And then in 2024, I was at the top of that industry teaching people all over the East Coast how to do what I could do.
Absolutely.
And that only took 6 years. Right? So what I'm recognizing is that as that progress, as that method gets honed, that lifespan gets shorter.
Right.
And so the more that you can learn in this method, the faster you can learn anything and comprehend things such that you get a very quick understanding of new information, where the truth is, where to look for it, who to go, and what to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Along your journey, speaking on foundation and developing taste and influence, you co-founded Art of Magic with Dan and Dave. And for me, at that time, there was so much, I'm just going to call like a lot of noise in the industry, and Art of Magic hits the scene, and all of a sudden now it's filtered, in my opinion, was filtered down to these are the things that are important, and I'm going to introduce you guys to some amazing wizards, magicians, conjurers, and you had beginners, intermediate, advanced, and it wasn't the hottest, latest, and greatest. You had Jared Kopp doing Lost and Found. You had a very early John Wilson, shameless plug,
Poker
who
players
was my last guest. Talking about what he's doing, the picnic effect. So talk to me about how that came about. Because, it's interesting to have Art of Magic and now Elliott today.
Yeah.
that makes more sense now than it ever has.
I think so. And again, I think that's just the virtue of, your life is your path. And so the more exploration you can do, the better you're prepared for the path that you're on. So I recognized, well, first I want to set some context. I worked with Dan and Dave in college as like a social media person, and then moved out to California after they brought me out and hired me as like an official employee. I moved out to California after I graduated from college and was just kind of mooching, for lack of a better word. I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to do anything. So I was just kind of learning blind. And that was okay because that's kind of how Dan and Dave had learned how to do anything. And so I think they took a little bit of pity on me and knew that I could see that there was something there, even though there wasn't anything to show for it.
Right.
And they were really, really generous to me. And at the same time, they started working with Adam Rubin to really take off with Art of Play. Art of Play was going to be, they started Art of Play while I was working with them. And the point of it was that they were burnt out by magic, rightfully so. Because I think they were looking at magic for something other than what it was giving them or what it had given them. Because they became wildly successful and world famous. And then you do that and you go, well, okay.
What now?
What's next? Yeah. So for them, it was like, okay, we're kind of done with magic. We want to go towards the custom playing card thing. We want to go towards the home goods, the lifestyle brand. They want it to be much more accessible, I think.
Right.
And artistically accessible. They wanted to use their knowledge and understanding to influence culture on a wider spectrum. And so it was only natural for them to separate from magic to go and use magic elsewhere. And so I became the steward of all of the Dan and Dave magic stuff. And so they went and did Art of Play with Adam Rubin. And then the three of us co-founded Art of Magic as a separate thing. And I ran that whole thing. They did a lot of they did all the hard stuff. They did the commerce, bookkeeping stuff. They got the website built, but I was a part of every one of those kind of conversations, guiding, because I was going to be my thing. And I was like, this is what my vision is. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And so once that actually came to fruition and we had Art of Magic, for me, it was about providing a space that elevated the approach to education from buy this piece of crap, get disappointed, throw it in a drawer, or buy this video, recognize you're never going to do the thing, throw it in the trash. I wanted to provide a space for people to be introduced to deeper thinking. And in the same way that I was obsessed with Pete Holmes and what he was doing for comedy with his podcast, I was like, this doesn't exist in magic and nobody's going to make it if I don't. And so that was what it was. Pete was always really clear, because I listened to his podcast. It's still running, by the way. He's been doing it for over a decade. So I had been listening to it since I lived in Louisiana. And his story resonated and aligned with mine in so many ways that I was kind of like, well, shit. I'm just going to do what he's doing, what he does. Like he and I are the same guy essentially. So I'm just going to do what he does. And with the awareness that it would become my thing, as long as I was just doing it,
Right.
it would become mine.
Right.
And so that's how that started, is I wanted a place again to introduce people to authenticity, transparency, and deeper thinking about the craft and art aspects of magic. Even though I didn't know what I know now, which is that I was asking all of the questions from a place of who has the answer and trying to find my own answer based on their answers.
Right.
And it was just this self-completing cycle of like, I'm not getting what I want. And it's just, I'm interviewing these more and more impressive people. It's one of those things like, don't meet your heroes. It's not because they're going to be bad people. It's just that you might not get the experience that you're looking for from it. And so if you are attached to that experience, it can be unpleasant. And I was attached to an experience of like getting wisdom. And what I got was more often than not like I was asking questions that these people had never asked themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, well, now I'm in a position where I'm the person leading this person that I admire so much to think about and so it really kind of, I didn't know at the time that it was going to have the podcast was going to have the influence on the community that it did, even though it was my goal.
Right. Well, I certainly don't think I would be existing in this space if it weren't for magical thinking, because giving people the opportunity to sit in on a conversation and be present. And even now I'm finding people who are listening to my podcast are writing to me and saying, I can't listen to it in the car because I need to sit down and I take notes, or I can't listen to it while I'm getting ready in the morning because it's like watching a movie that has subtitles. I gotta sit there and I gotta read the subtitles. I have no idea what they're saying in French. So I'm finding people I think without you and magical thinking and certainly art of magic, there would not be me doing this at all. Not saying I'm continuing the legacy. I don't know what to say. We're on air. So, but it certainly doesn't do justice by just saying that it paved the way, I think, for so many other magicians who were getting into magic at that time as well. You know, I hear people say that art of magic was their first, seeing things on video, and to have that sort of bar set for them already with all the stuff that was on there. I mean, I don't know where you go but up from there. So,
well, gosh, thank you. Because I've been out of magic, I don't really know the influence that it's had or the influence that I might have had. The only experience that I got that was really meaningful to there were two, but there was one that was really meaningful to me from a perspective of like, I did make a difference. And there was another that was sort of a wake-up call of like, oh shit, I'm the old guy now, which was the first Magic Live I had been to in a while was in 2023, it was 2 years ago. And the theme for Magic Live was beginnings. And so Stan Allen is on stage talking about, we need to remember why we got into this. What is this all about? What are we doing here? Get in touch with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw like the roster of performers and what they were going up there and talking about. And I went, this is not the convention that I used to go to. It looks the same, but the quality of conversation is so much different now. And it was this moment of,
Yeah.
Did I do that? Did I change? Did I hit people where they were in the masses? And then it caused the economic, the conversation to shift.
Yeah.
And I don't take credit for that. Like I'm the only person that contributed.
You had a platform that impacted.
I take credit for it in a way that, I was instrumental in it, I think.
Yeah.
And not, again, this has nothing to do with ego. It just goes, wow, shit, you do something and you show up and you do it consistently and you do it the same way with the same intention and it makes a difference.
100%.
And that was a lesson that I couldn't learn while I was stuck in trying to get magic to work.
Right.
I needed to get out and get away from it so that I could come back fresh with a bunch of time elapsed to be able to see the change that had happened. I needed to step away to see the evolution because otherwise I was just going to be in it every day.
Yeah.
And that getting away really gave me new perspective on how I can contribute, the ways that I can contribute, the ways that my contributing makes an impact. What is it that changed based on what I was doing? And then how can I change other things with that knowledge? It's just become it's much more in line with what I was inspired by as a child, right? People contributing and changing the conversation.
It's really interesting to be able to sit here with you, and I think you're more aligned. Like I'm seeing you, I mean, you're a different person. I just want I don't know if this will make it into a clip or not, but I want listeners to understand you are you, and you are here, and you are now, but you are different.
Yeah. Yeah, I am in a big way.
In a very incredible, interesting, and I'm happy to see it sort of way. Not
Well,
that
thank you.
there was anything wrong before, but it makes sense. It makes sense to have the journey you've gone through and some of the stuff that may not make it on here, but the research that I've done to prepare for this, I don't think it's good to touch on some of it, but some of it is just not relevant anymore for you.
Some of it isn't relevant anymore for me. That's true. It doesn't mean that I don't have opinions or insights about the thing, but I just have a much more holistic understanding of how people work because I put myself out into the world in a way where I was interacting with the general population all of the time rather than just other intellectual navel-gazing magicians.
Right.
And it being who I am and then gaining that experience caused what occurred to occur, which is just a transformation in my understanding, framing, perception of what reality looks like and whether or not it's as fixed as we believe it is.
Do you think where you are now, do you think something like Art of Magic, there's a platform like that that's missing? My personal opinion on it is that we haven't seen anything close to it since.
Well, I don't know anything about that because I dipped out and I'm not aware of any of the politics or the industry standards going on. So I can't speak to that from a well-textualized point of view. But I do think that there ought to exist a platform. And I think that Genie Magazine might be inching in this direction, by the way. But I think that there ought to be a platform where I'm not even going to talk about the platform. Here's what I want to say. What are we striving towards? As a community, because we talk about the magic community and we talk about the fraternity and how we're all brethren and, you know, you can go to another country and crash on a magician's couch. Okay. What are we going to do with that?
Right.
You know, like, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the history of magic and magicians and how they were born out of the shamans and the soothsayers and the wizards. And so instead of separating the lineage, connecting the lineage and recognizing that Robert Houdin is the one, whether this was his intention or not, but he fucked it up for all magicians coming after him because then it became about entertainment value and not transcendent experience.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that's just my uninformed opinion. I can be wrong about the specifics of that, but the point is that like there was a moment where it has a lot to do with philosophical materialism and the Industrial Revolution and all of those things. But like there was a moment where we went from understanding, recognizing, and using for the benefit of the people around us this transcendent visual metaphor and a spiritual understanding of it to guide and shape course of events, like Merlin and King Arthur. Right?
Yeah.
And I use that example. I'm aware that that's fictional and fictionalized, but I use that example.
In my world, it was kind of real.
But I use that example because it's familiar, right? And again, the reality that I'm living in now is that history and facts are incredibly useful tool, but so often they get in the way of the truth. Which again, literal truth, like did the things in the Bible actually happen? To me is like you're totally missing the point. This is a how-to manual on enlightenment, not it's a fact of record, but we don't have to get into the spirituality of it. But my point is that like, there are things that we pursue because we feel we ought to and only can later recognize what the value was such that we can move forward from there. So I think there is a place, I think to get back to your question, I think there's a place or a spot open and available to criticism, magic criticism as a performance art. And I think there's also a spot that's open for what are we going to do with this? What do we want to do? Historically, we made a difference in the world. Anybody who's interested in making a difference in the world through magic, I'm happy to talk with that person because like I'm very aware that responsibility and stewardship are incredibly important. And that can be a form of gatekeeping, like this person is not trustworthy, and empowering them with this understanding could lead to negative results. But I think that conjurers and humans in general skew toward generosity and love. We've just been adapted out of it. And so I think that if magicians can continue to create a space of love rather than division, and we build bridges towards one another rather than getting mad at the other person for not building a bridge,
Yeah.
then we start to take responsibility for what our craft and our art form look like and how it impacts the world. But again, it's all about vision. It's about like, what's the, when I was young, I ran around asking people what the point was, and nobody had an answer because nobody had decided on what the point was going to be. Well, I'm standing here going, I know what I want the point to be. Anybody who's interested can come talk to me about it.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't getting it from anywhere, and it's what's missing and what has been missing. And you don't need any more evidence than that Dua Lipa's new album was called Illusions and had a track on it called Houdini. Lady Gaga's newest track, Abracadabra. I mean, fucking, what are we missing?
Right.
How can we be missing the point so bad? We're living in a society where people are looking for spiritual guidance and a magical solution to the shitstorm that we live in.
Yep.
And we're going to go, no, pick a card.
100%.
An ace assembly.
100%. There's so much more, right?
But yes, and there's room for all of that. In fact, it's absolutely necessary because the people that are on the fringe edges of hardcore sleight of hand just makes the entry that much further in. The further the boundaries are, the more you got to catch up. That's what makes the quickening. It's the reason kids today are so incredible is because they have all the information, the entire, we don't need new information and we don't need to hold things back. We just need to appropriately guide the learning. And that's the part that I think I was really intent upon with Art of Magic and am intent upon in my future in magic is the guiding of the learning experience, and not as a general, this is how to be good. It is about empowering each individual by teaching them to open up these other aspects.
Right.
To empower them to make informed choices about what they want the world to look like.
Yes.
And the gatekeeping aspect comes into, well, do we want to teach people that don't want the world to look very nice how to do that?
Yeah.
Gosh, now we're in a catch-22.
Right.
But again, I believe that magicians are overwhelmingly positive and generous, even though people in the industry really only have an experience of the shittiness.
Yeah.
The power struggle.
What you're touching on a little bit is kind of developing taste as well, right? You're taking all of these different points that you've touched on, which turns into developing some sort of taste or some sort of, can you kind of expand and maybe fine tune developing taste and what your journey through that is like for you? Because I could tell right now your taste is similar to from what we've seen, but it's clearly very much more refined, not in the elegant sense per se, but it's much more. We've taken the weed nuggets and we've turned it into oil.
I'm reminded of a quote from Tom Ford. And this is not what he said, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. But he basically said, I don't define my taste as being good or not.
Mm-hmm.
But you put 5 shoes in front of me and I'm going to tell you which one will sell.
100%.
So his thing was I have commercial taste. It's not that I have good taste. It's that I have commercial taste. Well, what does that mean? It means that he can provide insight into the thing that is going to make people feel a particular way. Right. And so now developing taste is just about developing your roster of effect. What is the effect that you want to have? So developing taste, most of my life was about refining an eye for, before I understood it, what I understood to be luxury, but what I came to realize is actually just coherency, where the purpose, where the form and the factor are in alignment, and the thing that was made intentionally for that purpose. And the person who made it had that in mind. So that's what developing taste is. And it's a highly personal once you've gotten good enough at it. So for me, I was studying commercial taste. I was studying the tastes of all these other people in order to learn what choices get what results.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like David Fincher uses these themes and these techniques to elicit these results.
Right.
I may not want to do or communicate any of what he does, but at the same time, some of those tools and techniques I can cherry pick and use over here.
Right.
Now, how do you do any of that? Right? You do that by, again, developing these subtle senses. And what I'm talking about are interoception and proprioception. But magicians they have a leg up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I say that is because we have to use fine motor skills and we have to be able to sense other people's awareness.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not a mind thing. That's a heart and gut thing. So I just did a lecture for the Chicago Magic Roundtable, and it was my first lecture, and it was a ton of fun. And in the lecture, I talk about internal, external cues and senses and recognizing, developing this fine awareness, right? The subtlety of depth and a fine perception. An internal cue is not that you're hungry, but how do you know what you want to eat?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's that interoception. It's that ability for your brain to communicate with your stomach and send and receive signals. Sometimes that's, I'm hungry and I don't care. Sometimes it's, I want Chinese and not pizza.
100%.
Right? But so we're aware that we have that. We just don't know what to call it or how to slot it in. But once you can understand, it's called interoception, and you have that ability with lots of different parts of your body, not just what you want to eat.
Yeah.
Then you can start being aware of that practice and practicing that. An external version is like, how do you know if the sun's too bright? Or how do you know that you need to cut your fingernails, right? They get snagged on something. You get a perception from the outside. And then you have like the combination that I think is really interesting. And this is where I say magicians have a leg up, which is, how can you tell, even when you're not looking, that someone is burning your hands?
That's great.
Right? We don't, magicians like to talk about how magic isn't real and how it's just, secrets and illusions, and it's people's illusion of reality that we're manipulating. Right. And all that's true. And at the same time, what the fuck is that? What do you mean I can tell when somebody's looking in my hands? Well, we have scientific language around it. And as soon as we start incorporating this new, more advanced, quickened understanding, the more we can actually have autonomy in how we use it.
Right.
And nobody talks about those two other perceptions because we're all talking about how to do the Elmsley count correctly.
Right.
We're missing the forest for the tree.
Yeah.
And so, I'm the goal that I always have is just enlightenment. And all that means, not from a spiritual perspective, but just, have you thought of this?
Mm-hmm.
I have. I thought about it a lot. I thought about everything a lot. Have you thought about it?
Mm-hmm.
I've thought about lots of stuff that wasn't productive to think about, and I'm happy to spend all the time in the world talking to you about all those unproductive things so that you can understand that it's not where the juice is. But I'd rather talk about where the juice is.
Right.
And I'd rather people who are starting from a place where they want to be like the fool in the tarot and set forth on a new journey from a place of understanding and contentment for conscious evolution. And by conscious evolution, I just mean intentional improvement.
Yeah. I think setting an intention for me during my journey more recently within the past 5 years has changed my conjuring overall. Setting an intention on what I'm trying to do overall. Listen, learn, sitting with whatever tools I have or objects that I'm performing with. That was me looking at my doctor's back for those looking, which is why I have a really big emphasis on using a wand during performance. Not because it's a wand and magicians are supposed to have one, but there's something about holding a wand and using it, and it's not just direction and all the other stuff and there's more to it. I don't want to talk about it on here because it starts going into other stuff, but.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it on here.
Yeah, please.
Because I love the wand. I'm a big wand guy.
Absolutely.
And that actually, we're going to come back to wand, but I want to touch on something before we get into it.
Yeah.
It kind of got me into the wand, which is after I got out of magic and wanted to come back into it and start writing material and creating or performing again, I very specifically didn't go to cards. I know cards, I can do cards, I want to go somewhere else. So I started working with coins. And it's not that I had never worked with coins, like I could do a retention vanish as good as anybody, but I was interested in like, I've stepped away from sleight of hand and haven't really practiced anything, which means that the way that I articulate and touch and use objects is still influenced by conjuring, but I don't have the rote memory anymore of doing a retention vanish the specific way. So because I don't have that, I get to be really intentional about crafting this new way of being with props. And I had kind of a big epiphany with the coin thing because my mom introduced me to something that was hugely important for our family. And that is the limited TV series Lonesome Dove. And if you haven't watched it, it's a true masterpiece. It's not particularly easy to watch. There's some like kind of rough. So the context and setting is late 80s, early 1900s. The two main characters, Tommy Lee Jones and Duvall. What's his first name?
Robert Duvall?
Robert Duvall. Yeah. Robert Duvall are these two former Texas Rangers. And they were part of the crew that cleared out the Native Americans from Texas, basically. Which sucks. We can all agree. But the story is these guys who are past their prime and are now just rustling and running cattle. And it's a story, it's a four or five episode series that goes from Lonesome Dove, Texas, up to Montana. They do this cattle drive. And lots of stuff happens in between. But there's a scene in the first episode where Robert Duvall is at the whorehouse in town, which is a saloon, which is where he plays cards. And there's another cowhand there named Jake Spoon. I think his name's Jake Spoon. And he wants to borrow $2 for a poke. Meaning, can I borrow some money so I can go to bed with the woman here? And that whole scene's fantastic. But what really changed my whole approach and really influenced, I think, a lot of the new conjuring that I'm doing is watching Robert Duvall handle $2 silver dollars.
Interesting. Okay. I'm there with you.
And so watching him do that, I went, that's how a person handles coins like that. And that, not only that, that's how a person who's drunk handles coins like that.
Right.
Which means they're being careful to make sure that there's the right amount and that they don't drop them. So it's an intentional way of holding the coins, but it's not an intentional way of displaying the coins.
Yeah.
And it just got me thinking about this whole like convoluted, contrived way that we hold, because it's about proving it's really gone and not about the experience that you're creating. And so that was one thing in a long line of things that led to me embodying the difference between invisibility and imperception, right? A move can be invisible and the audience still knows when it's happening and that it's happening because they can feel it. Right. In the same way that we can feel when people burning our hands, the audience can feel when we are hiding something. And so in order to not let them feel that, we have to not have anything to hide, which means that we have to have the head, heart, stomach alignment that allows people the safety and the stability and the comfort to just go with the story. That's why magicians are cringe. It's because they're not aligned. It's not a fully grokked and embodied approach to doing a trick.
Super interesting.
Another thing is that like, and this is just interesting for magicians to think about, but the mirror neurons in your heart and your vagus nerves that are connected to your heart have been shown in scientific studies to respond to stimuli up to 6 seconds before the stimuli occurs.
Interesting.
So that opens up a whole realm of exploration for precognition from a scientific standpoint. It also opens up a realm for precognition as a method in conjuring.
Mm. Yeah.
And I don't mean like the precognition to like see a thing on a billet, but it does give you the ability to guide the experience, that precognitive ability, your heart and your gut sensing what's happening around you, even before your other senses can put it in your brain. If you can tap into that, then you are much more easily guiding the experience as opposed to responding to the,
Right.
Don't know that I've ever had a heckler in my audience. And part of that has to do with that I'm not really a theatrical performer, but I've never had a heckler in my audience that wasn't heckling on purpose. I've only like, and it doesn't matter who it is, but it's a thing of like, if you're here to be the center of attention, I'm just going to let you be the center of attention. That might mean calling you out.
Yep.
Like in my close-up show at the Magic Castle, there was only one person who ever interrupted my show. And that person was interrupting my show by smacking their gum. And that person was Max Maven.
Really?
And so I did. I stopped the show and I looked him dead in the eyes and I said, could you please chew with your mouth closed? You're interrupting the show.
And then Max going
That person got to be the center of attention.
Yeah.
He didn't go into his shtick. He stopped chewing with his mouth open. And I don't want to get into like,
do you think it was a test?
I don't know what it was. It could have been a test, but also fuck that.
Yeah.
Like that's not the kind of community that I want to have. You know, that is not encouragement. That is not empowerment. You know, one of the most, I won't name this name, but one of the most important and profound impacts in my magical career in adulthood was walking up to someone that had been recommended during a lecture, go up to this person and ask if you can see them do this thing. And so I did that. After the lecture, I walked up to that person and one of the biggest, most famous, most influential magicians was standing next to that person. And that person turned around and said, fuck off, kid. I've never spoken to that person since. That was at my first magic convention in 2012. I've never spoken to that person since. And it's not out of,
I don't blame you.
It's not for any other reason than just like, you know, you didn't show me that courtesy.
Mm-hmm.
And that has impacted the rest of my experience.
Yeah.
And it's my responsibility to get that cleaned up if I so choose.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd much rather hold it like I did when I was a kid as spite. And say, that's not the magic community I want to be a part of. And I can clean it up with you.
It's accountability.
It's not my job. But it's not my job to do that anymore.
Yeah.
My job is to just be a different way for people beneath me. And
I think a lot of that is understanding that we're going to encounter people along our journey that we're not meant to encounter and to be a part of. I mean, there's magicians that I've met who are famous magicians and tried to have very introductory conversations with them and understanding that it's just not on that path for me. And that's okay. It's just, and I choose not to control the things that you can control, right? And choose the people that you can choose to be around.
Right. And that's what we were talking about a little bit off mic, which was just the whole magic politics kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just the system we currently are in, and the system is changing,
right.
And the people who are at the top of that system happen to be of an older generation and are reluctant to change or relinquish their power.
Yeah.
Eventually, those people will be gone.
Yeah.
And so we need to be focusing as this kind of middle tier. Like, I want to come back to this, but, and we still haven't talked about the wand.
We've gone off.
But, you know, the other thing that made me feel like an old person was being at Magic Live and Michael Feldman looking at me and saying, we're the age that all of our heroes were when we started going to conventions. And I went, I don't like that at all.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
But so, okay, back to the wand. The context was the coins and picking up the coins and handling those differently. And so the wand for me was always about, right, like I knew the wand helps you conceal the thing, right? That's like the clear
Right.
magic justification for the wand is that it hides what you're concealing.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps focus attention. And all of those things are true, but we have removed all of the power from it by simplifying it to such clear directives. This is what it does. This is what it does. Here's why. Okay. Now consider the fact that it does those things because it is a symbol, right? Symbols are the things that have inherent weight.
Mm-hmm.
Symbols are the things that are the closest thing to the truth. And so the bigger and more powerful the symbol can be, and the more density it contains, and by density, I mean like examples of this thing throughout history that have been in that lineage, the denser the thing is, the more powerful it acts as a symbol. It is charged with the weight of its meaning.
Yes.
And so the wand, if you pull out a wand and you own the wand, you are just automatically in a different caliber than somebody not owning the wand.
100%.
And the wand in occult magic is a symbol that represents the will of the practitioner. It is a thing that focuses intention, essentially. It is an embodiment it is a physical representation and embodiment of the force at which you are pursuing your intended outcome. And so the wand is this emblem of power with integrity. And the integrity of historical significance, the integrity of the weight of the symbol, the integrity of taking it seriously, the integrity of coming from a place of deep understanding. Now, on the flip side of that coin, the wand can feel really hokey.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have that profound understanding of the wand, your use of it becomes an aesthetic prop, not an embodiment of your intention.
Right.
And so that's the danger, and that's where taste and the subtle senses come in. It is the more coherent the experience, let's say the performance piece, the more coherent that is, the better and more powerfully it will be received. Well, how do we measure coherence? It is how much of the communication, how much of the input, how much of the stimuli that the viewer or responder or participant is experiencing is all saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, I'll leave it at that so I can touch on it at the end.
You're just saying it all. You're doing my job.
Well, everything is all interrelated. And the point of building the toolbox is that we get familiar with each of the things that's interrelated, such that once we have that familiarity, we can step out of it and see how it all works as a whole, such that we can step out of it and see how that hole interacts with other holes and how those things, and then you can just keep zooming out, just like you can always keep zooming in. And that comes back to another Hermetic principle of as above, so below. The macro reflects the micro.
Absolutely.
And vice versa.
I think it's hard for me to come by clips of magicians using the wand the right way without it being hokey. And one of the ones that I actually watched it yesterday, I just keep going back to it, is the Tim Conover cylinder and coins, using it in a way that isn't, obviously for that version you need a wand. You could do it without a wand, but it wouldn't be as great. I've seen those ones too. But the way he's presenting it is almost as if he's presenting the wand first before he's even presenting the cylinder and the cork and the coins. So I just wanted to mention, it's a great example.
Yeah, Conover was...
Did you ever meet him?
I am not educated enough about the man that was Tim Conover to have an opinion about his approach to magic.
I think
because all I know is what I've seen. Well,
maybe
I'll learn an interpretation of it.
Yeah.
But it's a best friend's interpretation of it.
Yeah.
So it's, and I'm not putting Eric down by any means, because gosh, do I love him. And you're writing your best friend's book posthumously. It'll be difficult to be unbiased or even necessarily honest about some of the stuff.
Yeah.
Because I know that he had some difficulty with his mental health, and so it's entire
creating that book in general is the lineage of that. Mead has been very vocal about it, when he was going down that journey, that this is difficult to do without you here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so I'm not familiar enough with Conover or his material to really speak on that, but I will say that just like anything, sophistication is communicated through subtlety.
mm-hmm,
Subtlety is communicated through depthness.
mm-hmm,
Deafness is communicated through lack of tension, right? And so if you have to hold the objects that you're using like a vice,
yeah,
then the object is using you, right? It's like if you're uncomfortable in your clothes, the clothes are wearing you.
yeah,
It's not the other way around. So, and part of that is an ownership thing. It also comes back to, are you comfortable, dude? If you're not comfortable naked, serious, if you're not comfortable naked, you're not comfortable. And we live in a society, again, it all comes back to the system we live in, where we are encouraged not to be naked.
yeah,
Not to be vulnerable, not to be authentic, but to go outside, external, to find the things that are give us a flash of validation and a dopamine kick, as opposed to any kind of harmony or balance.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more, actually, because I'm not going to share that on here. But yes, I agree with that because I think it's an incredible thing to see people who are not comfortable with themselves try to put themselves in garments that are not for them and they're not comfortable in, and they wear them, and you sit there and go, you're clearly uncomfortable wearing X, Y, and Z or wearing that shoe. Just because Kanye West put it out does not mean it's for you, or
Well, gosh, and you have to do that experimentation too.
right.
You
Yeah.
have to make all the mistakes so that, and that's the element of building your taste is that
Yep.
you have to make lots of wrong choices. You have to learn lots of ways not to make light bulb.
Yep. I think
And I
that
tell that
wardrobe
to
is
my-
a great way to do that, though.
When I tell my clients that at the beginning, I say, and I use the barber analogy. I say, think of me as a barber more than anything, where the first time you go, you're going to leave with a haircut that you may not love,
Right.
but it's going to be a great haircut.
Right.
But the longer you develop that relationship and the more haircuts you get, the more that you're going to merge your understanding of each other. You'll be able to speak his language. He'll be able to speak. I'll be able to speak yours. You'll be able to speak mine. We'll be able to come together, and then we can start building up.
Right.
And once you set a context for people like that, that really helps them be self-expressed. It helps you get paid because they're not going to be like, well, I don't like this. Give me my money back. So it just makes a big difference in setting the context, right? Clarity is kindness. Using clarity, being clear, setting appropriate expectations. This is all stewardship, right? This is all how to do magic in the real world, is by being someone who's unlike everybody else's everyday experience. Well, what's everybody's everyday experience? It's not gentle. It's not quiet. It's not thoughtful.
Yeah.
It's not generous.
Mm-hmm.
So be those things, and you're automatically the most interesting person anybody's met that day.
Yep. You must have a good barber because you literally summarized up in like 3 sentences what I try to tell people who sit in my chair who still don't get it.
I only have a good barber now. I spent my whole life getting bad haircuts and haircuts that I wasn't happy with and people that weren't able to give me what I wanted. And I met this guy named Varut. He's actually the roommate of one of my clothing clients. And he and I have developed a relationship much like that, where we've come to know each other and we sit and we talk about life and, our experiences and what we think about. And I sit down in the chair and I give him, one sentence, and he gets it and keeps going, because we built that relationship.
Right.
We built that understanding, and he knows who I am and what effect I want to have on people, because I am someone who understands what effect I want to have on people and then how to communicate that to someone.
How
Such
interesting.
that they can understand it and then act on it in another realm, being my hair.
How interesting. I think that, a lot of maybe that's a different podcast, but in that industry, there's the hack barbers that, kids magician barbers doing, and it's part of it, right? Like you said, it's part of that world. And then there's the ones that historically understand, going back to what we're originally taught to do and service and all of that stuff. That's how I treat everything that I do. Everything that I do in terms of my conjuring all the way up to barbering. Even I try to do it on here, but sometimes it's hard, but it's all the same. If you're not treating it for me like barbering, you're going to sit in my chair and you're going to understand why my station is over a 200-year-old station, because not only does it look good, but historically they all on my station, at least, there's the drawers and all the stuff and everything had a use. And it all makes sense to use that. Even today, you could modernize it and do whatever. It's part of the history. I just think, but there's a big resurgence of that in the last decade as well, where we're seeing more mindfulness in barbering. Like you said, it took you a while to understand that a barber's job is to not just give you a haircut and get paid, but what can the barber do for you? People forget that. I don't know. It's because of society.
That was the experience that I was trying to get people to understand, not necessarily because it was the one that I was having. I was having not that experience where I was really struggling with the people that were cutting my hair to get them
To
my
understand.
level.
Yeah.
Well, if like learning to appreciate subtlety and nuance is a lifelong skill. And if I'm the first person to sit down in your chair that demands that of you, it's going to take some work, And so the way that I would frame it, and the way that I would frame it for my clothing clients and for anybody doing any work on me, was, first, I'm a magician. So silhouette is important. I'm a magician, so the effect is important. And I'm a magician, meaning I think about all the stuff, number one. Number two, I'm a designer. And so because I'm a magician and a designer, I kind of am an architect, because I'm an architect of reality. So let's look at the hair architecturally rather than as so now I'm talking about, like, now we're basic shapes, right? I'm like, what's
precision.
the shape? What's the right? And so my way of communicating to people that are at a lower level of subtlety and nuance is to take them up one ladder rung at a time through metaphor. Right? So if I can say, okay, we're starting from scratch, but I need you to think about this as if you were an architect designing a skyline, and it's that big of an impact. Okay. Now I want you to think about it like a designer picking a font. Now I want you to think about it like, and just use all these different examples of subtlety such that I can build a ring, a circle around the point for somebody that gives them, boom, an activation of that node. And now they have an understanding of subtlety and nuance that they didn't have before, not because they didn't understand it. They just didn't necessarily have the language or a place to put it.
Do you feel like performers or magicians, conjurers, underestimate the impact of what you wear on when you're performing, or in general?
I think that if we're going to speak hyper generally, then my response is going to be hyper general, which is that I think most people misunderstand and or are oblivious to the impact that anything has. And it's not specific to magicians, and it's not specific to clothes. And even if you're highly aware in some ways, you can lack total awareness in others, which is why it's important to have good community and support system to call you on your horse shit, which I'm very grateful to have people that go, no, you're wrong about that, and here's why. And I'm grateful that I'm someone who goes, oh my God, you're right. Now I can be right. No, I'm right. I would much rather be corrected and keep moving forward than dig my heels in. How
unproductive the other one is.
Right. And so it's important to have people that can shine lights on your blind spots. And I think that for magicians, just considering every instance as an act of communication, like it's the observer effect in a way, but what's happening when we're not being observed? Well, we're building the habits of what we're going to do when we are observed, right? So we have to use that liminal space of non-observation to practice the results that we want, to practice the things that are going to get us the results we want. And so we can then take that metaphor even higher and say, well, I have to use the liminal space of non-observation, meaning my mind, where I'm the only person in there, to practice the things that are going to show up in results. Because the way that our brain works is think, do, be. The top level is the thoughts that you have. The mid level is the choices that you make based on the thoughts that you have. And then the bottom level is the lizard brain. That's who you are. And the only way to change it is from top down. And so what you think becomes what you do, meaning your opinions and the way that you frame the circumstances of the world becomes the choices that you make, because you make choices based on that information or decisions. And then you make the same decisions over and over again, and that's who you are. Not only that's who you are because those are the results you got, that's who you are because that's the machine that you built. Right? And so if we're using the think, do principle, think, do, be principle, it really starts at changing your thinking. And that's the point of things like gratitude charm. Right? It's not to make yourself feel better in the moment. It's to entrain your mind to find gratitude.
Interesting. How many people misuse tools like that? I'd be curious to know. I don't have an answer for it, but
what I have found in my own experience is that lots of people know how to talk about the tools, and AI can talk about the tools. So you can type into ChatGPT, give me all the wisdom, and it will spit out all of the self-help stuff. And if you're someone who comes from a background of finding the truth of the meaning, what you very quickly recognize reading all that stuff is that this is the blind leading the blind. This person doesn't understand why it works or how it works. They just know it works and so are parroting it. But because they don't know how it works, they can't communicate it in such a way that the importance or the symbolic nature of it is conveyed, such that the person who hears it from this person doesn't get it.
Yeah.
So it's this education from a lack of understanding that causes the blind to lead the blind. And so I think that the more people who have an understanding can contribute to a greater understanding that can contribute to a greater comprehension.
Before we start to wrap up, I do have a few more questions.
Listen, my podcast was many hours long. We can keep going forever and ever, so I'm good. And also, I've been out of magic, so I don't have a lot of people to talk to about it. So I've got lots to say.
We'll just give you a whole week of just episodes every day, and we'll just do this.
Yeah, we'll pick a new topic every day.
I don't really have much of a stance on this either, but I'm just curious to know where do you think magic will be in the next, where is it? I'm not even going to put a date on it. Where do you think magic is going? Where do you want magic to go?
All right. So there's a concept of a predictable future. Right. So based on the think, do, be principle I just used, we can use the understanding that most people are operating within a set of patterns to have a reasonably predictable future. Right. It's the way that all analytics work. Right. All advertising works this way. The issue now is that we are living in times that are incredibly tumultuous, which means that it is difficult to have a predictable future that looks nice and happy and lovely. However, being that there is a predictable future for how things are going, we then decide whether or not we're going to take responsibility for what happens next. And so I'm interested in taking responsibility for what I want magic to look like. And part of coming on this podcast is a step in that direction. Part of the conversations that I'm having privately with magicians and things that I'm working on privately that are, hopefully pushing in that direction. But what is that direction? That's really your question. What is it going to look like? Well, it goes back to what have we been? What role have we served? And what role are we not being asked to? Because nobody's going up to magicians and asking for answers. But the zeitgeist is hungry for a magical salvation because there's no other way out of this absolute cluster that we're in.
Absolutely.
And so I'm interested in providing relief in that way. I'm interested in providing relief that, from a magic perspective, that helps people get back in touch with their subtle senses, their interaction and relationship with nature, with community. You know, we've been isolated and we've been beaten down, and, you know, all of the experience that I have and what I'm saying comes from a place of privilege. I want to acknowledge that I am a straight seeming white man in USA. I mean, it doesn't get easier than that. And so I want to be really clear that I'm aware that everything that I have to say is colored by and influenced by the privilege that I have. And without that privilege, I would not have access to the insights that I have, because I have been able to be relaxed and observant rather than putting my nose to the grindstone and working my fingers to the bone. So I'm interested in getting people to slow down. I'm interested in getting people to recognize that the new thing isn't better than the old thing.
Right.
Unless it is. But you have to be able to discern the difference. So I'm interested in wisdom and mystery, in bridging the two things, in encouraging people to seek and understand true, capital T, truth, encouraging people to be emotionally stable and emotionally regulated. Those two things together lead to a sense of balance that, when you have an active imagination, can propel you towards transcendent art, meaning art that is capital A art and that makes a difference in the world. You know, having emotional regulation and curiosity and imagination and intellect give you the strength to be able to make tough choices about what you will or won't stand for in your life.
Right.
And having made those choices, then you have the wisdom that comes from having made those choices and knowing better when and when not to make choices like that, and when to let go, when to judge with compassion rather than severity. You know, working all of those different aspects leads you to understanding and wisdom, hopefully towards some kind of divine, mysterious, magical meaning, purpose. And I'm interested in exploring that with people. I'm interested in getting people excited about the possibilities for the future rather than what we're being told to feel, which is absolutely terrified.
Yeah. Are you doing this through Recont, or are you doing this because what you're doing, how you are now, your present self, you seem to be shining that light to project it all through Recont with menswear, with some of the services you're providing with, and feel free to plug it now if you want to, but you're also, going back to the wand, you're also offering a wand experience. You have a wand spin course on your website, which for me, we've talked about it and messaged about it previously, about how there is well, let me back that up before I get crucified. There is not a great example or a perfect example of the wand spin. To take that deep dive, closest is Amar's pictures are great. They do justice, but it leaves you wanting more. And you're one of the first people who actually sits down on the couch casually and says, let's break this down and talk about, and you provide examples. Can you talk about Recont, that, and the wand that you have on there?
Sure. Let me go grab it real fast. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. But I'll talk in the meantime, or I should not talk and you can cut it out. You tell me.
You could talk.
Okay. So are you familiar with the measurement of a cubit?
No.
Okay. So a cubit is an ancient form of measuring before we had standardized measurements that essentially is the length of your arm from your elbow to a point on your hand.
Okay.
Like, this is a cubit. And so when you would give out information for the length of something, you would say it's 5 cubits by 15 or whatever.
Okay.
The wand should be about a cubit long, you know, and I like to measure from the inside so that it rests right in the center of my palm. this is a reasonably standardized length. The weight is where you can get into some play on the technique, but I think this length is kind of ideal for any sort of dexterous manipulation. Go longer, you can go shorter, do the things that you need to do. But I find that ergonomically, this length gives you the ability to do any of the moves you're going to do without banging yourself or your wrist or your watch or whatever. As far as the deep dive is concerned, again, it's just about subtlety. It's just about appreciating subtlety. And so much of magic's misdirection is the big action covers the small action. And so people who don't have control over their internal mechanisms have to use big sweeping movements to hide the thing. But if you aren't hiding anything, then the thing becomes very simple. And it goes back to imagine what a perfect version would look like.
Right.
So this is a thing. I don't think I talked about this in the course as it stands now. And all of that is probably going to change. So to answer your question about Recont and the courses and how am I doing all this stuff, one of the difficult things about me, and when I mean difficult for other people, is that I'm a new person every day. And what I want to do and what I want to achieve is new every day. And so I have specific goals, but how those goals are achieved are just details.
Right.
That's part of me just like being aligned with the whatever. Okay.
Right.
So I have always been unsatisfied. I have always been unsatisfied with Recont for one reason or another, whether it was like I'm an artist and people are buying clothes, not art. People don't understand the value of what I'm providing. And I had imposter syndrome that I had to get over, which I did. And that was a whole we could spend 2 hours talking about imposter syndrome, but there were all these different things about making clothes for people that was unfulfilling to me. And they were in the same way, like I have never really found a way to make that work for the magic community. And so I am partly interested in doing made to measure for magicians, dropping the price way down, like industry insider wholesale pricing on me making you garments. And while that is a really, I think, worthwhile service to provide, I don't want to be doing that anymore. That's not the kind of impact in magic that I want to have anymore. I would love to teach somebody to do what I do and get them set up to do it for me.
Right.
And I don't mean for me like where I'm getting paid. I just meant so that I don't have to.
Right.
But so that I can do what I want to do. But until such time arises, I'm kind of stuck doing both, which means I'm not doing either very well. And so, and it's expensive to run a business, and it's expensive to host things online, and it's expensive and you don't really realize it because this is $20 a month. But over a period of 5 years, you look at it and you go, God, I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on stuff that I'm not really seeing how it's impacting the larger, I'm not really.
Yeah.
So the things that I'm working on currently have much more to do with being in person, whether that's touring and lecturing to clubs or in different cities or whatever. Or I'm very interested in one day, maybe next year, having a week-long retreat, maybe a long weekend that is specifically my vision. And, and seeing what the feedback from that is going to look like. But it has a lot more to do with empowering a mindset than it does teaching a specific move. Because I honestly, I got where I am without any help from anybody except for all the help that I received.
Right.
But I got where I am because of how I was approaching it mentally. And so if I can just get people to take this new approach, then they can do all the work themselves. They don't need somebody else to do the work for them. And that's I'm recognizing the need, which is, and a big part of this was, reckoning with it. The men that I was serving, the men of our generation and older generations even, don't know how to dress because they were never taught, because after the war, everything was denim And if you were in a suit, it was a corporate thing, and it was all identity based and not anything having to do with quality or utilitarianism. And so a lot of the traditions fell by the wayside. And that's totally fine. I don't really give a shit about any of that. But what is important is that the legacy of handing down the knowledge was lost. And the framing for young people of how to hold knowledge was lost. And it was lost specifically in dress, but it has worked that way in every industry for everything because of the externalization of market forces and the global economy.
100%.
So I just recognize that that's where the need is. I don't need to teach people how to be better at the wand spin. I need to teach people how to be better people. And then their wand spin will be better because of it. And when I mean better people, I don't mean kinder or gentler people, although that's a byproduct. I mean, you're just a more tuned machine, right? I'm working with a guy right now who's writing a book, and he has something about like fine tuning your frequency. And I'm like, dude, you can't tune your frequency until you have an instrument that works.
Yeah.
And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, you have to tune your instrument before you can tune to a frequency.
Right.
And he was like, whoa. And it's just these, it's, to me, I feel like everything's obvious all the time. And then I say things and people go, I have to rethink everything now. And I'm like, fuck, I should really be talking to more people.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point though, but I think that has to happen because historically, when the conjurers begin their journey, they have no fucking idea that there's other magicians, conjurers, wizards out there until they stumble upon it at some point during their journey. I didn't know there was another magician. I kind of knew, like, I don't want to be naive and say magicians didn't exist, but I didn't know there was another magician met another magician until like my late teens, early 20s. I had nobody else except me, and I had nobody, not that it would have made a difference looking back on it, to say, this looks good, this doesn't look good, think about it this way, think about it that way, consider this, consider that, And actually now, where I am now, I think I would have preferred not to meet another magician, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And that's it. No.
Well, I totally get that, because an aspect of maturity is recognizing things that ought to have gone better or differently and didn't. And, that being one of those things, like, I put my trust in this person that I shouldn't have.
Right.
We can turn our whole mission into making sure that ever happens again, or we can just learn the lesson and let our mission be what our mission is going to be and just have to learn that lesson. And I think that so often people get caught up in the lesson and make the lesson their mission, as opposed to learning the lesson and moving the fuck on. And it's all important. There's room for all of it. There's room for hack magicians and bad magic. There's room for artists, and there's room for people trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
It all has its place in the ecosystem, and the ways that we shape the ecosystem affect everything.
If you could pass down one lesson to the next generation of magicians, what would it be?
As if I haven't already.
Yeah, I mean, you have, but you were just talking about, passing down something historically and how that's, me personally, I've always said I think magic should have had some sort of a better foundation, and in general should have been passed down as a very, 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 very simple one-step foundation for conjurers, like just like a simple, here's a pen and a notebook, and this is kind of write everything in there.
Here, I'll answer the one question a couple different ways. If I were going to give a younger magician or younger magicians in general something to consider, I would say that one day this will all be yours. So what do you want from now until then to look like?
Never heard that.
And how would you like to prepare for when this is all yours? And who would you like to study from? And who do you think has it now that has it? And who do you think has it now that just kind of is using it? I know that's really vague.
Not really.
Language, but...
No, it's not vague at all. I think it's deeper than what's... Yeah, that's actually that question holds a lot of weight to it.
So that's one question. The other thing that I would say is, from a more practical standpoint, is break it down. And I'll use an example here with the wand spin. The wand spin is this motion all the way around the hand, but what if it's just that? Instead of spinning all the way around, this accomplishes the same action.
Right.
So now you can get a really good understanding of what and when that spin is supposed to happen, because the whole thing isn't spinning. And now you understand that the way that the wand closes is by these fingers closing. And so now you understand that catching the coin isn't something you have to hide. It's the way the wand works.
Mm-hmm.
And so now if you come over here and snap your fingers closed, if you're snapping your fingers closed to catch, then you're catching. But if you're snapping your fingers closed to whip that wand around to make a magical pass, you've got full coverage. You were able to catch whatever it was. And now it's just about the breaking it down into the timing of it. And then once you've got this down, then adding this is just a little decoration to put on top of it. So I would say break it down into its barest parts, and get those barest parts with as little tension as possible. Right? I go back to learning guitar, and it's like, I gotta gnash my fingers on the fretboard with the purpose of getting that muscle memory so that the next time I pick up the guitar, I can just lay my fingers on the fretboard.
Yeah. I think, it's before we even get there, I think it's more so just sitting with it and having it and being comfortable with it and understanding yourself. And then let's go into how we use this.
Yeah. Good enough is never good enough until it is good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's so good.
And I'm really titillated by things like that. Good enough isn't good enough until it's good enough.
Yeah.
What is that? How does that work? How does anyone understand what I say? But I say that and you go, that's good. And I'm like, what just happened? What kind of spell did I just cast that you understood what I meant? That's interesting to me. That kind of shit is where magic lives, right? Like,
did you assume I wasn't going to understand it and I was going to give like okay.
No, I'm a pretty good spellcaster. I knew that you were going to get what I meant.
But also, I'm very uninterested in the fact that when I am speaking, this is a whole other thing, but when I'm speaking with people outside of the podcast, and not even magicians, just in general, because I read so much and I listen so much and I have so many other interests and things, I am always on a deep dive on all of these things. And even when I talk to my family and I'm like, oh, did you know this director for this movie and da-da-da-da-da? I'm so uninterested in having conversations where they're just like, cool. And I'm like, there's more to it than just, oh, cool.
Yeah. I think one of the other big key pieces of wisdom that I gained after leaving magic is that you have to meet people where they are. And that,
I kind of,
Well, what I mean by that is like, I lived my whole life having political opinions that really violently interacted with my parents' political opinions. And now I had been able to bring them closer to my side because I interacted with them as an adult, starting from where do we agree?
Right. I agree.
I have lots of thoughts and opinions.
Yeah.
Let's see where we align. And then, do you know why? Because that creates safety.
Yeah.
He's not going to attack me for what I believe because I believe it. Now I don't have to hold on so tightly to what I believe. And we can have a conversation where what I can believe can blossom and grow and change and evolve and shift.
What's interesting about that is that we're from a generation, and I actually wrote about this, shameless plug on my Substack, about specifically politics in general and just my upbringing within that. I don't have politicians in my family, but my grandparents, who were like a second set of parents to me, were able to have constructive conversations that were productive about politics that didn't divide. And sitting there and saying that some of these opinions were obviously going to upset some people in our family, being able to hold space that says, why does that upset you? I may not know that information, and we don't have to agree on it. Politics is not going to divide a family, although in today's world, it very much does so. But in the
Well,
90s,
in today's world, it's intended to. That's the point of it now. The point of it is to continue to sow disinformation, unsafety, unsatisfaction, external validation, and emotional dysregulation. Because if the population is emotionally regulated and they have correct information, then they can make informed choices about right decisions to cause a difference in culture and society. But if we have that cut off at the knees with emotional dysregulation and misinformation, there's no way for us to elevate our standing or intentionally evolve as a society.
absolutely. Yeah. We're not from a generation where it divides. It was my point.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. So, yeah, you can.
I mean, and that baffles me that we've gotten to that point.
Which is, well, it's part of the quickening, right? So, like the whole Industrial Revolution and materialism as a philosophical concept is about breaking things down,
right.
getting to the heart of the thing. Well, the byproduct of that is isolation, right? Because that's what we're trying to isolate everything to understand it. Isolation, division, discordianism, right? So, we are part of a generation that we're the last generation to grow up with the American dream as an ideal. Now it's just actually literally impossible, but we're still pretending it's not. And we're the first generation that has to reckon with it not being possible. The generations underneath us never believed it to begin with.
100%.
And so our generation has a really interesting and unique perspective on the shift between the old guard and the new. And I think it's our responsibility to steward that in a healthy way. Now, to go back to occult philosophy and hermeticism and alchemy, that dissolution is part of the necessary process for change. The point of the dissolution is to get all the crap out and then to bring it all back together in an elevated form. And so I think that the materialism aspect of trying to understand things has only gotten us to recognize we don't know how any of it works because we've been using the wrong models the whole time. And when I say wrong models, I don't mean bad models.
Correct.
The models that we have are great, and they've afforded us unbelievable, incredible technology such that we actually don't need to do anything anymore. We have had the technology to completely change the entire world, everything, and then we didn't because that didn't make money or power. Money was the evil. It's not the evil anymore. Power has always been the ultimate evil, and that's what's happening in our world.
Yep.
And if we don't recognize that fact, then we're not aware that the game is about consolidating power, and then we're stuck in the money conversation, which is just keeping us distracted.
100%.
We have to understand that it's about power. I don't want a complete collapse of the Roman Empire. I want a delicate, intentional, conscious evolving of what we have, because if it breaks all apart, we'll just repeat the same cycle. The only way to get out of the cycle is to start on a new path.
Yeah.
Not to start over from the same one.
I have a final thought and a final question for you, and then I'll have you answer our guest question from our previous guest.
Fantastic.
If magic disappeared tomorrow, or after we got off the air, what would you do?
Do you mean conjuring?
Conjuring. It
If
disappeared.
conjuring disappeared tomorrow, what would I do? How does it disappear? What's the nature of its disappearance?
I don't know.
Is it like it never existed? Or,
Play
well,
along.
see, this is the kind of thing. It's like, I would love to play along.
No,
play
let's
along.
think about it. Let's break it down.
So
right?
hold on, wait. I was watching something that really struck my funny bone. I was watching Game Changer, I think, or maybe Make Some Noise on Dropout, which is a game show, and it involves the contestants improvising together in scenes. And one of the players started this improv scene where they were two children playing in a sandbox, and the first little kid is like, "Okay, so this is the entrance to La Gomorra, and this is the thing, you know." And the third player walks in and goes, "Honey, are you playing too strict again?" And then the kid goes, "Yes, Mom." And that put me on the floor laughing so hard. I had never seen somebody go, "Are you playing too strict?"
Yeah.
Because that was me. I was playing too strict. If you weren't part of this world I was building, I didn't want you in the world because you were going to break it.
You're so different.
And
so interesting to me.
It's part of meeting people where they are as adults, meeting people where they are. And that's what I mean when I say there's room for all of it in magic, because some people want to laugh at Know the Clean Hand because they've never heard it before. Some people want to see 30 card tricks in a row. Some people want that, and that's great. Meet them where they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that has to do with like who you are as a performer and what you want to contribute, and then giving that to the people where they are.
Would you be offended if I don't know, this could ruin the whole thing, but would you be offended if I said that speaking to you and understanding a little bit more about where you're at now, previously you were a little stiff? Would you be offended by that? I'm
No,
sorry
I'm
if
not
that offends you, but
I'm not offended by that at all.
you're not the same person. I'd want people to understand, and I'm not doing this because we've talked about it, but you're not the same. Like, I came in here thinking I was going to get, this is Magical Thinking Podcast, and I'm Elliott, but this is not that.
Yeah, it's not that. I'm not offended at all. And I think that as someone who has crafted my experience of my life intentionally, or to the best of my ability, I've spent most of my life feeling like I was 23, and now I feel my age. And that has to do with having enough life experience to recognize just how beautiful and pitiful my rigidity and hard opinions. It was all defense. It was all protection. It was all, this is how I want you to perceive me. Because if I show up having hard opinions, you assume I'm confident about them. And I am confident about them because I thought about them a lot, but it was an antagonistic defense. It was passive aggression, being rigid in my viewpoint. Part of that was to be taken seriously because I felt like what I believed needed further consideration. But a big part of it was, again, imposter syndrome. I have to show up and show up strong in order for people to see that I should be taken seriously. And now I'm a lot less tied to that because I know that I am strong. Jason England is an incredible card technician. And one of the reasons he's an incredible card technician is because he's a monster human being. He's a gentle giant. He's got immense strength in his hands that then he can use it very delicately. And that's sort of how I feel about my personality now, is that I know that I have a very strong personality, and I know that my magical ability is such that I can really command reality to perform the way that I want it to when I'm interacting with another person. And so the balance of that is flexibility, is relaxing, is having room for everybody, and coming from a place of generosity and compassion. Because I know that if I need to, I can drop the fucking hammer on somebody. Because I spent enough of my 20s doing that.
Yeah.
So now, I had this really lovely experience of, it is rare somebody will bring up a topic I haven't considered to me. I haven't considered. And when they do, I am delighted by it and excited by it, not afraid that my opinion, I don't have anything to defend if I'm always a student.
Right.
And what I do have to defend is hard-won knowledge, wisdom, and experience that I communicate. Hopefully, this is how it was for me. Not this is how it should be for you, but if you are interested in what I've got going on, maybe the way that I learned it could be helpful to you. To me, it's all about encouraging, empowering, consciously evolving progress. It's about progress. It's about harmony and beauty and harnessing potential such that it makes a good difference in the world. And we can get into, well, what's good for you isn't good for everybody. And it's like, fuck that. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I think you might be leading
Because
the
any
way.
conversation like that is stuck inside of the system that we live in.
Right.
And I'm saying if you can dip out of the system, which most people can't, they don't have the luxury. Again, I'm very privileged. But if you can dip out of the system and see the other side of what it means to be emotionally regulated and have deep thought about things that are, exciting your imagination, you come to recognize the joy that's in life that isn't external, but that comes from a place within.
I love it. I think everything that you're doing, I know you have some things going on in the background that maybe will come to fruition and light and be projected somewhere. I'm here for it all. I'm so
Thank you.
honored. I really am, and privileged to be able to talk to you, not Elliott, talking to you and
Yes.
talking about, I mean, we pretty much covered it all. And the last thing I want to close out with is our previous guest had a question. Every guest previously gives another guest kind of like a pay it forward situation. And Matthew Holtzclaw was nice enough to provide his question.
What's the most regular flaw you see in the magician's stage dress?
So, excellent question, Matthew. You always look great, very well groomed and beautifully tailored suiting. Not that I made, I'm just acknowledging. It's well done. And a question like that is quite large. I think the most regular flaw that I see, I'll answer again from two perspectives. One is people wearing things that are too tight and are therefore unflattering because they communicate tension. So here's what I mean by that. If your clothing is really form-fitted, but it's not cut for your skeleton and your musculature, then the garment is going to fight against your body. It's not only fighting against your body, it's also in tandem working with gravity. And so if the clothing isn't cut for your body and it's cut too small, or cut very close, then drag lines are going to form across all of the different points of impact. So you'll typically see like swooping either, at the sides here, down at the midsection or around the back, or, these different like ways that the garment is communicating it doesn't fit well. So I would say that the most regular flaw is like people are wearing clothing that isn't conducive to a relaxed persona. If your persona isn't relaxed and you want to look like you've been, wallpaper pasted into your clothing because that works for your shtick, great. More power to you. I love that for you. But I think to get into the second question, the biggest flaw is that people just aren't considerate of all of the different aspects of the performance. And God, it's exhausting to do that all the time, which is why you get somebody to help you do it for you, who's better at it than you are. But so, any performer, and I make clothing for people's bodies. I don't make men's clothing or women's clothing. If you want clothes, come to me, regardless of your gender or genitalia, and we'll get something that you're happy with, period, the end. That's what I'm about. Any of the other stuff to me is just in the way of people getting what they want. Not that it isn't important, it's just not relevant to what I'm doing. I think the biggest flaw is just people go out and they think the tricks are good enough, and it's not good enough until it's good enough. That's awesome. And so, just finding a support system is so important. Collaborators are so important. Sharing ideas in a way that isn't just yes, but is also generous. Like, I see what you're trying to do. Let me help this way. And I think just safety and community. I think that the more divided we are as a community, the more divided the world is going to be, because the world is a reflection. The macro reflects the micro. The more harmonious you are internally, gets little like pebbles in a still lake, sends ripples all the way. So the more harmonious that you are, the more that impacts your immediate community, and the more that is impacted, so on and so forth. And so if we can band together as an underground community of wonder workers to bring harmony and peace to the world, you think we don't have the power to change it? Because I can tell you that we do. I did it.
So good. Thank you for being here, being present for this episode, and I hope our paths will cross soon.
My pleasure, Benny. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to do it.
That's it for this session. If you got something out of it, follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with someone who would too. It might not seem like much, but every follow and review helps the MO sessions get discovered by more people who dig these conversations. For more of my writing, magic, stories, thoughts, and everything in between, check out The Dope on Substack. You can keep up with the MO sessions on Instagram at MOSessionPod. And if you want to follow everything else I'm working on, I'm at 1BennyEDALS. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next session.